They did not forge the vessel to heal. They forged it because war had revealed a truth too cruel for priests to name. Death was not a clean departure. A soul did not leave the body in a single breath. For one heartbeat, sometimes two, it lingered in the wound, stunned by its own ending, bright and trembling like lightning trapped beneath skin. Most never saw it. Priests called it mystery. Executioners called it silence. Soldiers called it nothing at all, because men who survived battle learned not to look too closely at the dead. But one woman looked. Her name was never kept in royal ledgers, temple records, or the carved histories of victorious kings. Later generations called her the collector of thresholds, for she was obsessed with all things that existed only in the instant before becoming something else. The breath before confession, the shadow before dawn, the tremor in the hand before murder, the final warmth before absence. She believed true power did not live in life or death. It lived in the crossing between them. To her, endings were not conclusions. They were doors. And if a door could be found, studied, widened, and held open, then perhaps what passed through it would be stolen before the dart claimed it. So she sought craftsmen who did not ask what they were making. From grave-quartz, taken beneath nameless tombs, and black furnace glass, cooled in funeral smoke. She commissioned a vessel, narrow at the throat, and cruelly wide in the belly. Around its neck she bound iron stripped from execution hooks. Into its face she set a mask of green crystal, carved neither to honor the dead nor comfort the living, but to remember the expression between terror and surrender. The mask had hollow eyes. Behind them, hairline cracks glimmered like trapped lightning. When the vessel was finished, it did not shine. It watched. And when the collector placed it above a dying man for the first time, the chamber fell silent before his body did. Something pale rose from the wound. The vessel opened without moving, and the last unfinished force of the man's life was drawn inside. That was the birth of the Veil-Taker Phial. Though in those first days, the priests who served the collector called it by another name, the first mouth. Long before kings hoarded gold, there were priests who hoarded endings. They believed death should not be wasted. Every final breath, every unfinished plea, every flare of panic in the eyes of the fallen, these were more precious than jewels. The grave, they claimed, swallowed too much. The world lost too much to silence. So they followed armies. They walked behind executions. They descended into plague trenches and ruined sanctums where bodies had cooled, but something of them still clung to the air. The Veil-Taker Phial fed on aftermath. It did not fill with liquid in any ordinary sense. It drank remnants too thin for mortal sight. Heat without flame, will without body, motion without flesh. These fragments gathered behind the green crystal mask, circling in slow currents, pressing against the glass as if they remembered being hands, mouths, eyes, names. Yet the vessel had its first law. It would not answer to caution. It could not be sipped. It could not be tasted. It could not be measured out like medicine or poison. The phial had to be filled until it strained against itself, until the black glass seemed ready to weep green fire. Only then would it wake, and when it woke, it demanded everything at once. The first war priest to uncork it expected strength. What came instead was absence. The world around him loosened. The edges of spears blurred. Arrows passed through the space where his body had been a breath before. Curses struck near him and thinned into sparks. For a handful of heartbeats, he moved like a thing half withdrawn from reality, neither fully present nor fully gone. Then the second gift arrived. Everything trapped within the phial broke loose inside him. Not the dead themselves, but their final resistance, their last refusal to vanish, their unfinished force. It flooded his limbs all at once, a battlefield condensed into a single swallow. Old rites ignited in his mind. sealed invocations answered without sacrifice. Powers that should have required years of slaughter awakened in a breath. He won that battle. He was found afterward kneeling among corpses, clutching the empty vessel, weeping black blood from a smile he could not stop. The priests called it a miracle. The collector called it proof. The dead had become fuel. The phial eventually passed into the hands of a king who feared the one thing conquest could not strangle. Not rebellion, not betrayal, not age. He feared the moment after the last heartbeat. He had conquered fortresses, broken treaties, buried rivals, and watched entire bloodlines vanish beneath his banners. Yet every victory only sharpened the terror within him. He understood that all power ended the same way, with the body cooling and the world continuing without permission. When he heard of the vessel, he did not send soldiers. He sent priests. They found the collector's hidden sanctum abandoned. The altar was blackened. The walls were marked with green burns. Nobody remained, only the phial standing upright in a circle of ash. Its crystal mask glimmering faintly as if it had just finished listening. The king called it a remedy. His priests knew better. Still, they brought it to him. At first, he used it in secret. Before battle, he would drain the full phial and swallow a storm of stolen endings. Those who fought beside him swore his body blurred at the edges, as though he had stepped half a pace outside the world. Spears missed him by instinct. Arrows cut only after images. Blades passed where he had been, but could not agree where he was. Walls of men broke when he moved through them. For a few heartbeats, he was untouchable. But the phial's greater gift was not avoidance, it was awakening. The stored souls did not return to life, they burned. Their final force rushed through the king, igniting old rites in his blood. Forbidden powers answered him. Deeds that should have required an altar of corpses could be torn loose in a single breath. The king became a doorway, wearing skin. And like all doorways, he stopped belonging entirely to one side. After each battle, his generals noticed changes. His voice carried tones that were not his own. He dreamed aloud in languages he had never learnt. He flinched at mirrors. Sometimes he turned sharply toward empty corners, as if someone had whispered from just behind his ear. Yet he kept drinking, because the phial turned the silence of graves into sudden miracles. And miracles are the easiest curses to excuse. The Veil-Taker Phial never offered a small bargain. That was its seduction and its warning. The vessel could hold an unnatural reserve, far more than its size allowed. Every death near it left a trace, and every trace sank into the green-lit dark behind the mask. The heavier it became, the quieter the air around it grew. Soldiers claimed that when the phial was nearly full, campfires burned lower in its presence, and wounded men stopped groaning when it passed. Not because their pain had eased, because something was already listening. Once filled, it became unbearably still. That stillness meant the dead were ready. When opened, the phial emptied itself completely. It did not give according to need. It did not preserve anything for later. It poured every stolen ending into the bearer in one violent flood, spending an entire horde of the dead in a single act. Those who survived the draft described the sensation differently. Some felt as if their bones had become doors. Some felt a crowd pushing through their hearts. Some felt the world step aside. All agreed on one truth. For a brief span, harm itself seemed uncertain. Steel passed beside them. Arrows arrived too late. Fire folded around them. Wards shattered against their shadows. They moved between consequences, like smoke moving between fingers. Then came the awakening. Ritual power, sealed power, forbidden power, anything that hungered for sacrifice could be forced open. The phial did not grant life, blood, or ordinary strength. It gave the bearer the momentum of stolen endings. It made ancient invocations bloom instantly, as if an entire battlefield had knelt inside the chest. But the dead did not consent. They remembered. Each use left something behind in the bearer. A whisper, a twitch, a borrowed grief, a stranger's last fear. Some heard names in their sleep. Some woke with tears on their faces for children they had never known. Some began speaking to the phial when they thought no one watched. The king was the worst of them. He no longer conquered to expand his realm. He conquered to keep drinking. The phial had a second law. It could not carry its theft across a true threshold. The king discovered this during a winter campaign beyond the eastern passes. His army crossed into a valley where no battle had yet stained the snow. The phial, heavy from the slaughter of the previous fortress, dimmed the moment he passed between the boundary stones. The green light vanished. The whispers stopped. The vessel became only glass, metal, and silence. His priests panicked. His generals called it failure. But the oldest gravekeeper among them understood. The dead were territorial. Souls taken in violence remembered the soil where they had been torn free. They clung to blood-soaked earth, broken gates, burned fields, execution yards, temple floors. They did not travel willingly. Every border was a refusal. Every new land stripped the vessel clean, as though the world itself rejected stolen endings carried too far from the place of their death. The king called it inconvenience. The gravekeeper called it mercy. The phial could not become an empire in glass. It could not hoard every war forever. It had to be fed anew, again and again, wherever its bearer wished to use it. So the king carried war with him. Every battlefield became both victory and harvest. Every siege became preparation. Every surrendered city became a disappointment unless blood was spilled enough to fill the vessel. In time, his court learned the truth. The king did not march because enemies threatened him. He marched because peace starved him. And when the phial ran dry, he became less than the man he had been before. His hands trembled. His stare emptied. He sat among maps without reading them. Priests found him in crypts, holding the vessel to his ear, begging the silence to speak. He no longer feared death. He had become addicted to borrowing it. The final campaign began against a city that had already opened its gates. Its rulers sent white banners, tribute, hostages, and keys. They offered surrender before the first siege tower rolled across the plain. They had heard what the king had become and believed obedience might spare them. But surrender did not fill the phial. The king ordered the attack at dawn. By noon, the streets ran black. By dusk, the vessel was heavy. The king climbed the temple steps alone, drenched in the lives he had purchased for one more impossible ascent. His generals watched from below, afraid to follow. Even they could feel the air thinning around the phial. The crystal mask no longer seemed carved. Its expression had sharpened over the years. Its hollow eyes appeared deeper now, crowded with movement just behind the glass. The king lifted the vessel. He meant to become untouchable once more, to pass through blades, through arrows, through consequence itself. He uncorked the phial. And this time, the face opened its eyes, not the carved eyes, the real ones behind them. Every soul he had consumed, every final breath he had stolen and spent, every death he had forced to burn again, rose inside the glass and recognized him. The green light flared so violently that the temple windows burst outward. Witnesses below saw the king's body turn translucent, then thin, then tear like wet paper in a storm wind. He did not fall. He was divided, dragged in 100 directions at once by the dead he had mistaken for fuel. When the light faded, only the vessel remained on the temple steps, still full, still hungry. The king's face had joined the mask, not as a carving, as a warning. After the king's end, the phial was buried, then stolen, then sealed, then unearthed again. It passed through assassins, zealots, warlords, mercenary captains, desperate saints, and grave robbers who believed every curse belonged to someone less clever than themselves. Each owner learned the same lesson too late. The phial did not grant dominion, over death. It granted a temporary lease over what death had already claimed. It let the bearer slip the weight of the world, move between harms, and wield stolen endings like a weapon. But every soul used through it remembered, and the vessel was not merely storing them. It was teaching them the shape of a door. Over decades, then centuries, the green crystal face continued to change. Its expression became less symbolic and more aware. Soldiers swore they saw mouths forming behind a mask when campfires burned low. Priests heard faint knocking from within the glass. Collectors who locked it away found the cabinet doors open by morning, though the seals remained unbroken. Those who used it often stopped dreaming of their own lives. They dreamed instead of halls beneath the earth, where endless ranks of silent figures waited behind a thin glass wall. In those dreams, the bearers always stood on the wrong side. Some tried to destroy the phial. Hammers shattered. Fires turned green and cold. Holy water blackened. One gravekeeper wrapped it in burial cloth and sank it beneath a river. 3 years later, it was found on the belt of a marauder whose entire warband had died in a gorge. The field always returned to slaughter, or slaughter returned to it. The last known bearer was not a king, priest, or warrior. She was a thief. She stole the phial from a reliquary beneath a city of mausoleums, thinking it a relic she could ransom to collectors. She knew nothing of its laws. She knew only that the green mask seemed valuable, the metalwork ancient, and the guards terrified of touching it. That was enough. But the city beneath the mausoleums had guardians older than its royal dead. They cornered her in the catacombs before dawn, driving her through halls of sealed bones and locked shrines. Warding sigils burned along the walls. Iron gates dropped behind her. Stone began to collapse under the command of priests who would rather bury the relic again than see it escape. Desperation teaches quickly. The thief uncorked the phial. It had been stored near centuries of death. It answered with catastrophic generosity. The vessel emptied through her hand, her veins, her shadow. The world lost its grip on her. Collapsing stone passed through her as if mist could not hold her. Ancient wards shattered against the shape she had almost ceased to be. Sealed doors burst open before her like rotten wood. Then the dead inside the phial ignited. Not gently, not mercifully. Their unfinished force rushed through her, and for a handful of heartbeats she became a legend in motion. She crossed killing floors untouched. She slipped through iron. She moved beneath blades before they were swung. Every barrier built to contain the living failed against someone temporarily borrowed by the almost gone. She escaped into the night carrying an empty vessel, and a pulse that no longer beat in proper rhythm. For 13 days she lived like a myth. Locks opened before she reached them. Blades missed her in alleys. Men sent to capture her forgot why they had drawn their swords. She walked through danger with the calm of someone who had already died and found the experience useful. But on the 14th day, witnesses saw her stop in the middle of a crowded bridge. She turned her head as if someone inside the flask had whispered her true name. Then she lifted the phial to her ear. She smiled. Her body folded inward without blood, without bone, without a scream, like a curtain drawn through a ring. Only the vessel struck the stones below. It did not break. It was empty, of course. Always empty, until death came near again. Now, the Veil-Taker Phial surfaces, where slaughter has become routine. It hangs from the belts of marauders. It sleeps in the locked cabinets of collectors who believe glass can be owned. It rests beneath altars where priests pretend their miracles are clean. It appears in the hands of desperate warriors when armies break and rituals must awaken faster than prayer. Those who know its reputation keep their distance from the green face. Those who do not reach for it with certainty. The phial waits for both. It grows heavy in the presence of death. It listens as the last sparks of the fallen tremble free of their bodies. It gathers them behind the mask, where they press together in the dark, whispering without sound, remembering the shape of hands, teeth, names, vengeance. When it is full, the air thins, the mask watches, the vessel becomes still. And somewhere someone begins to believe one perfect moment of stolen power is worth any price. That is the oldest lie the Phial tells without speaking. Because the price is never paid when the vessel is opened. It is paid later when the battlefield cools, when the silence returns, when the phial is empty. When the bearer realizes that some of the voices inside them did not leave with the final charge, they stayed, listening, waiting for the next battlefield, for the next hand, for the next fool who mistakes possession for control. And when the phial is heavy, when the whispers behind the crystal grow eager, when the green light moves like breath beneath skin, someone, somewhere, is about to drink a battlefield in one swallow, and the mask will gain another face.